So it happened. Steve has been banned at one local for a couple weeks. So if you don't know what's going on, Tourney Locator, which is the Texas main region of Dallas-Fort Worth, they run Lost Tech City and Low Tide City and a bunch of majors. They have banned Steve from their locals for a couple of weeks in a whole big kind of DLC ban. So what you have here is you have DLC Pack 2 is banned. That happened last week. This week will be Steve is banned. Next week is Kazuya banned. Next week it's Kazuya and Steve, and then all DLC are banned the next week in No Neutral November. Obviously, I'm anti-ban, so I'm not a huge fan of this, right? But I feel like if you are going to do it, this is probably the best way to do it, because you can do that and then see what happens from it, because everyone will talk about a ban, but then when a ban actually happens, people will be upset about it, and I know that as someone that voted for the Meta Knight ban in like the secret super backrooms in Brawl days, I understand that. The problem is that a lot of bad stuff has happened kind of as a result from this. There were players that went to the DLC Pack 2 thing as banned, Steve and Kazuya mains that went and then did poorly, and then they got a ton of harassment, which isn't cool, including some bigotry, but I don't really want to show that on screen, but to the people that happened to, I'm sorry that happened, that sucks. It's just kind of not a fun time. I mean, obviously the results were fine. I mean, I think Lima won the tournament, so it was pretty much a normal top 8, except there was like no Yanni and then no Burr, and then otherwise it was like top players from Dallas, like Atomic. So I mean, this was the top 8, right? It's, non-DLC characters, there's no Steves and Kazuyas, but the problem is, and I kind of found this under this tweet, is the fact that most of these, top 8s don't really have a lot of Kazuyas. There's a Kazuya and a Steve, and that Steve is Yanni, and the Kazuya is Hippo. I've never heard of them. And then you have Yanni, and then there's no Kazuyas here. There's a Sora, though. Then you have Yanni, and the Min Min, and the Kazuya. Kazuya's not even Burr. I don't know if Burr just doesn't enter. But yeah, it's basically one Steve and one Kazuya at most throughout these. So there's not like a big difference. It's not like it's, as this person said, like a, multiple of the same character, which again has always been one of my problems with people banning Steve, is it's really still a low percentage, even in the relatively high percentage of, characters for this game. It's all 3%, or like most of the top 8s have one, because Onin and Akola go to everything, either in Japan or in NA, or sometimes like Steve or Yanni or Jake will do well. I said Steve. Steve is not a player. Shout outs to the Steves out there, the literal people named Steve. And of course, there is some data that people are latching onto. And again, this is no shade at any particular person who's tweeting, unless you're like the actually shitty people, because I like Whompy, but you see 68 people were at the last Ultimate Shockwave and then 91 were at this one. And yeah, I can understand how like a character being banned will definitely bring people back into the scene, but there's a problem here, which is the fact that a lot of random things will bring people back to the scene that aren't necessarily the topic of conversation, as you see from this tweet by DeKillSage, who is an old school Smash 4 Fox player. He's been around for a long time. I mean, most of y'all would probably know him as like a fighting game player. He plays Skullgirls. He's one of the best players in the world at Skullgirls. He's one of the best players in the world at Dragon Ball FighterZ, I think, when he was active. So New York City Smash has 128 plus entrants for 2 Arcadians. So when, just in case you don't know, Arcadians are events that the PR is banned. So you're not allowed to have your top 10 or 15 or whatever your PR number of players is. Sometimes even like lifetime PRs. Like, if you ever were on the PR, you're not allowed to come to these tournaments. So you have 2 Arcadians that have 128 plus entrants, when that literally will never happen at the locals or even the regionals. Like, not necessarily, like, not regionals that people travel to, but just, like New York tournaments that Suarez and Zomba and, all the top New York players will go to, like, barring DeBuzz, because I don't think DeBuzz goes to that many of them. So 128 people in 2 different Arcadians. So is the solution then what I tweeted, that, events get bigger when the PR's not around, so we should just ban top players? Like, obviously, it's not quite the same thing, but I find that having a one piece of data that you're looking out for this one thing isn't necessarily helpful, because again, as we saw, the meta didn't really change in the Dallas tournaments. Again, there was one Kazuya, one Steve in those top 8s. I don't know how much of the not top 8s were Steve. I don't know how riddled like the 2-2, 3-2 area is with Steves and Kazuyas. but probably not that many, I would assume. So I don't know, it feels weird to kind of make these points, and then of course the entire conversation with banning Steve in general, of course, is just like, oh, well, the Steve players are carried, or the Kazuya players are carried, and they're bad actually, and they shouldn't be winning, which one is silly, because as we kind of talk about in this tweet, the thing, I mean, a lot of top players have kind of been speaking out about the Steve ban from Dallas, which is interesting for reasons I'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, like, people will talk about, it's like, oh, you throw shade at the people, and that's kind of what I was talking about earlier that I touched on. And it's annoying for what Barnard's Loop says here, which is 70% of top 100 players are solo mains. So if they banned Pikachu, I would no longer be here. If people, I mean, I might still be a top player, but I wouldn't be as good as I am, right? If they banned Rob, a lot of Rob players wouldn't be able to perform the way they do. I mean, we've seen Zomba secondaries, they're crusty except for the Lucina. I love Zomba, that's a joke. But like, they're like, Steve and Kazuya players are the ones that get complaints because people continue to complain about Kazuya and Steve. Not necessarily, like, I understand people being frustrated at a character. You're totally allowed to be frustrated by a character. But the Steve and Kazuya stuff has been incessant and a lot. Like so goddamn much. I mean, we saw #ban Steve at the Invitational, right? Like, I don't know, y'all remember when every top player did this after the Invitational? And again, this isn't like a particular shot at Light in particular. I wasn't a fan that anyone did this. I just explicitly remembered he did, and I didn't remember who else did it. I think it was like Mars, and I think maybe Riddles, I don't remember. But it was a lot of players after Akola came to the Invitational and kind of destroyed everybody except for Cola, which I think was game 5. But I don't know, not a fan of this, especially considering the funny thing, and this is the reason I kind of picked Light, is then he tweets this, like, when the, Dallas-Fort Worth scene kind of goes after stuff, which is odd because literally, like, Steve hate was always there. I'm not going to lie. Online and watching Jake win over and over again, people were not happy with that. But then when offline happened, I mean, a couple of Steves got some results here and there, but nothing really super big until Akala and Onin, and realistically, a lot of NA players don't care about Japanese results, unfortunately. But, like, I feel like Akola coming here and kind of doing what he did at the Invitational is what sparked a lot of people doing Steve hate, because all of their favorite top players being Light and Mars and Riddles, and I don't know if Cola did it, but like, a lot of people were suddenly like, ban Steve, and that literally immediately, like, there was Steve hate here, and then it suddenly went boop and went all the way up, because people complained about it in a very visceral way, and now they're saying, oh, I'd rather bitch about the character. And, I tweet this here. Again, I'm anti-Steve ban, but I'm like, yeah, I mean, they're related, because if you are going, like, if top players especially are going to complain about something, the people that aren't as knowledgeable about if they're being facetious or if they are joking, or, a lot of top players will, like, complain about things as to get their frustration out and then grind the matchup. But that doesn't happen at all levels of play. That doesn't happen in the community of hundreds of thousands of people. So when top players will complain about something, it gives the lower and mid-level players, which is the majority of the scene, and that's not an insult, I'm just, there's a scale at some point, it gives them a reason to complain about it, which then gives them a reason to hate the Steve players, and that leads to a bunch of the harassment that the Steve mains have been getting. I mean, the chats when Steve is on screen is crazy. Even sometimes Kazuya, but people like Riddles enough that they like Kazuya, except when Riddles beats players that they like more than him, like Light or Mars or something like that. And then, Leo hasn't really complained about it, so for Leo, yay, good job, Leo. But I don't know, it bothers me that I feel like everyone got their rocks off to just, like, complain about Steve, and now that someone actually took action based on the things that have happened almost as a direct, thing happening, a direct movement happening because top players consistently complained about this shit. Now something's happened, they're like, oh, actually, this was bad, which, I'm glad, I guess they're coming to their senses that a Steve ban and a Kazuya ban are stupid. But it's just odd, I feel like, to kind of put the idea in people's heads that this is ridiculous, even if it is a joke, because people don't know you're joking over the internet, and I don't know, if Light has ever clarified. I'm assuming Mars has on his stream. I'm assuming Riddles has on his stream, but, like, not everyone's going to see the stream, not everyone's going to see the YouTube. I am very aware that as a content creator, sometimes people are going to miss my tweets and my streams and my videos. People will talk about, oh, have you talked about this thing? And I'm like, yeah, like 4 months ago. And they're like, oh, I didn't even notice, right? That happens. But again, Not a fan of Steve bans, not a fan of the rhetoric that's happening, and please, again, if you are a Steve hater, leave the players out of it. They're playing a character in a video game. I understand that you don't like that character, but hating them as people and harassing them and giving them shit doesn't help and is only literally hurting the scene because you're making people actively leave the scene, which won't help. Like, that's just harmful because it'll just be the next character. Do you know how many people complain about Aegis when, you know, the top 3 of Smash World Tour was Aegis? If Aegis continued to dominate like that, I'm sure that Cosmos and even Spargo at some level probably would have got a lot of hate. I mean, I see when Leo picks Aegis, he gets more hate than when he plays Byleth. It happens. It's literally 1 for 1. So just, if you don't like a character, that's fine, but don't harass the players. And that's always the end of it. And I think banning the characters is dumb. And yeah, I mean, that's about all I have to say about that. I'm sure you know, a lot of the top players are now in support of Steve being legal, even if they think the character is dumb, because finally someone banned it and they were like, actually, this is bad. So I'm glad that people came to that conclusion, but yeah, I wish it happened a little sooner, and the Steve mains got a little less hate. So, you know, have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Pikachu, busted.